Well, son, as president, you're above that.
I do solemnly swear that as your president, I will goof off and eat candy.
4 more years! 4 more years!
Welcome back to yet another episode of Animation Dissection, the podcast that keeps changing its opening tagline. So, I am your host, Neeksy, here with Zorak, of course.
Hey, how you doing?
All right, so this week we are talking about The Critic. But before that, as usual, let's go to news time. So, this is news time. So,
This is a bunch of random animation news.
Yep.
Breaking.
Breaking, even though some of it might be a week old. So we both have some stories this week, but let me start at least with one of mine. The trailer for The Little Prince, based off the very famous French novel, has had its international trailer released. It is being produced by Micros Image, which is a French production company, of course. This one being its, I think, Montreal location. And last I saw, according to Cartoon Brew, the budget for this film is $80 million, and thus it is going to be France's most expensive feature thus far. One of the interesting things about it, I think, is that it's a combination CGI and stop-motion film. So there's like a framing device which is being done in CGI, but then the parts of the actual book, The Little Prince, are being animated in a stop-motion kind of paper style. Oh, and the director is Mark Osborne, who did Kung Fu Panda.
I've got no opinions about him whatsoever.
So, well, I'm thinking it's going to be really interesting, and it'd be nice to see a international film hopefully get a wider U.S. release. So I'm kind of hopeful of it. I think some of the visuals and the style, especially for the stop motion sections, looks really, really cool. So I'm pretty excited. And then the only other piece of news I got this week is that Phil Lord and Chris Miller of the Lego Movie fame, and also a variety of other projects, I think they did that Fox. What's it called? It's Last Man on Earth. They're a part of that. They're doing all sorts of stuff, and they're adding yet another thing to their ledger, and it's going to be a all animated Spider-Man film at Sony due sometime in 2018. As we've talked about before, Marvel and DC have done animated films previously, direct to DVD usually, but I think this one is intended to be a studio release, I think. So,
I mean, if this is theatrical, this would be the first ever, I think. I can't think of that there being an example, even in Japan. I presume this is somewhat tied to the fact that Sony's been in negotiations with Disney tied to this whole Marvel thing of trying to get it tied into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And
oh yeah, reconciling which titles are owned by which production company and all that.
Yeah, for those who aren't familiar, essentially way back when Marvel was its own separate entity, it essentially sold off the rights to various of their different parts of their Marvel franchises to different production studios. And the big ones, at this point, are, Fox has like X-Men, I believe. Sony has Spider-Man. Disney ended up getting, the stuff that's like the Avengers, which, obviously Disney now actually owns Marvel, probably because they discovered that they're making a lot of money off of this. So that's probably what's going on here, is that Sony has been, it actually came out that Sony was discussing with Marvel that they or rather with Disney, to actually get Spider-Man in on that, because they wanted that crazy Marvel movie money. And they also wanted to be capable of getting, the comics tie-ins, because looks like Marvel's going to be probably, or rather Disney is probably going to, I guess it's the same thing. Disney/Marvel is going to be reformatting their universe and killing certain characters off and whatnot to try to basically stop giving free advertisement for the companies that were stuck with the rights.
Oh wow, so they're just kind of cutting them off at like diseased limbs, essentially.
That's what it seems to be. It's not like, they're not being overt about it, but that certainly seems like X-Men as it is and as it has been, it's probably going to change because Fox isn't playing, ball with them. And it looks like the Fantastic Four might just be dropped outright because I forget who actually has that rights. other than they've been really bad about using it, and they've just been producing movies just to fuck over Disney. And it seems Disney's going to actually get a bit vindictive about that.
Well, as is Disney's want.
Yeah, which is it is how they are. But yeah, they've produced animated movies that were direct to video before, and they've been fine. I mean, obviously the staff on this, or at least the directors on this, are super competent. So who knows? It'd be interesting to see maybe getting well. Would this be a more kid-focused version of Spider-Man, or will this be a more heavier-focused version of Spider-Man, or somewhere in the middle, I guess?
I have
That's the big
absolutely no
question.
idea. I mean, this has just been announced, and
Yeah.
and
I know,
Phil Lord and
that's-
Chris Miller, just because they did the Lego Movie doesn't mean that they only do kid stuff. Because
I know.
mean, Last Man on Earth and God, what was it? The MTV show Clone High. I mean, that was definitely not for kids. So
Yeah, I'm just getting more of like a rhetorical question that they could approach it from both avenues, because obviously with the comics type stuff, it's implicitly intended for children, because comics kind of are, that's their main audience. But at the same time, they get pretty dark, especially compared to like what airs on, like, say, television. So would this actually be a chance for us to have something slightly darker in action non-comedy animation? That, who knows? I mean, I'd be pretty skeptical of it.
Well, I mean, like here's the thing I have with all the superhero movies is they're practically animated films completely at this point. I mean, they have live action actors, but considering how much of it is all CG effects and a lot of CG characters, it's just maybe one or two steps removed from just being animated films at this point.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a reason why there's a lot. Anytime you discuss animators, you actually end up discussing those films these days, because a lot of animation staff certainly is working at them. But
Well, and the
I don't
same
know.
thing with video games. I mean, video games are increasingly very much like animated films, just with a little bit of interaction and yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, it's the cross pollination of the culture market. But one thing the reason why I was asking it is the sense that, as we were discussing when we were discussing Perfect Blue, animation is treated definitely as, still in the U.S., as very much a kids game, or at
Yeah.
least in the sense like kids market, if you're not making a comedy, if you're not making a sitcom that's animated, because you can get away with more stuff there.
Yeah,
I
well,
was wondering
animation,
if,
quote unquote, for adults is usually raunchy comedy, and then animation for everything else is kids.
Well, I'm just saying in the sense that, yes, the Avengers type stuff is basically animation, in the sense that, yeah, you could have just easily have made this as a cartoon as well, but they would never be as. I mean, those.
Well,
films
they
aren't-
would never be made as pure animation just because of the marketing and the thought process behind them.
Yeah, because
would
it
go,
wouldn't
"What?"
market to the same audience, in a sense, because you could get dude bro going like, "Hey, dude, let's go see the new Iron Man. Robert Downey Jr. so fucking cool, man, sick." But you would never get that about an animated Iron Man, because it'd be like, that's for fucking babies. And it's a minor point, but it's just kind of an interesting distinction of the differences in attitudes for what is essentially the same thing.
Well, I think the actual public attitude would be a lot more easily embracing of an animated movie for these kind of superhero things. It's the people that make the decisions that have, I think, the biggest mental roadblock to making these types of decisions.
I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting to see.
So,
I mean,
we'll
we'll
see.
see. We'll see what happens. I mean, they technically already did make a Marvel animated movie in theaters recently. Actually, thinking about it, in the sense that Big Hero 6 is actually based off of a very low rent Marvel IP, like very low
Yeah.
rent, to the people, in the sense that
Really
nobody
bad.
really realized it was, basically like, oh wait, this is a Marvel film, huh?
Yeah.
And I mean, I've not seen that. I hear it's pretty good.
Well, it was,
So-
and that one was also geared towards children, essentially.
Sure, and that's kind of the reason, like, you could easily see them going in that direction. Apparently, the source material also kind of leaned a bit more towards the kid type stuff anyways, because it was pseudo anime, gotta aim it at the kids type mindset, which is often how that sort of thing goes. But we'll see. Disney and DC have both made or are funded making more serious animated films that went direct to film. So yeah, we'll see if it ends up in that direction. If not, it's not a big deal either way.
Yep. And so you got a couple of good stories to bring up.
Sure. So the first thing is that Toei is making, for the first time in 18 years, a new Dragon Ball TV anime. So for those aren't don't remember, Dragon Ball was an insanely popular anime out of Japan. They made a version in the 80s. It's called Dragon Ball. Then there was Dragon Ball Z. And then after Akira Toriyama, the director and maker of the not director, but the writer of the original manga, essentially bailed. They made a anime original series called Dragon Ball GT, which I think this basically establishes as being non-canon.
And also terrible.
It really sucked, and there's a reason why nobody really liked it. So they're basically
pink furry versions of them as the ultimate form. Yes.
Yeah, that was ironically that wasn't
was
even the worst part about it. It's
strange.
just kind of badly paced. They tried capturing the comedic aspects of the original Dragon Ball, which was honestly I really like the original Dragon Ball a lot more than Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah,
Dragon Ball
same.
Z had a lot of issues, though. To be fair, the Kai version that they remade of it and that they've been bringing back over here fixes so much of the issues about Dragon Ball Z. Like
Namely the pacing.
yeah, exactly. Like they trimmed it like I think it was like a 300 400 episode series down to like 70 80 episodes I think. I'm going off the top of my head there, but it's basically in that ballpark, which is a lot of trimming.
Yeah, that's like more than 50%.
Yep. So they're making a new one. It's set after Dragon Ball Z. They've been kind of pushing in this direction recently in the sense that they've been making a lot of animated tie-in films kind of as like a Dragon Ball Z sequel films, and they've actually been pretty good. They've been super fan servicey in the sense that they're not really interesting from a standalone standpoint. That's not something you're like, oh, I want a film to watch. I'm gonna watch this Dragon Ball Z Battle of the Gods. Like, there's no way that anybody not familiar with Dragon Ball Z should be watching that. But as it was actually super entertaining as kind of a goofy, kind of self-referential sort of thing. They're
And
really,
jokes and kind of meta humor.
yeah. I mean, it didn't feel like really kind of overdone in that sense, but it was certainly made and aimed at that sort of fandom, and it was just kind of like a sort of fun. It was good, in that sense. It wasn't high film by any means.
We'll see. The problem I'm having with this is that this is going to be Toei's TV team.
Yeah.
And considering what they did to Sailor Moon with Sailor Moon Crystal, I am not foreseeing this being very good. In fact, I kind of hope it's going to be a flaming disaster just because when Toei TV does a flaming disaster, it is goddamn hilariously terrible. It's not just regular terrible. It is Hindenburg, Titanic, 9/11, solar eclipse, sun exploding kind of terrible.
Yeah, the Sailor Moon remake that they made was really, really bad.
So, and considering how even the original TV series had flaws, as we might put it, this might be kind of yeah.
I mean, it's not necessarily a given. Like,
Well, it's not a given,
okay.
but just
to be
the-
fair,
just-
they've
just
also made some
likelihood.
really bad, stuff in the sense that One Piece has had tons of issues as of late along similar lines. But at the same time, Toei does have and has made good TV anime before, and certainly of this type. Like some of that Digimon stuff has been fine. It's not something I've had any interest in watching. I believe Toei has also been making those Precure Magical Girl anime for younger girls as well. And I think the director for this actually worked on quite a few of those. And honestly, a lot of those are basically Dragon Ball for girls anyways. So,
We'll see. I'm not holding out high hopes though.
Oh, sure. And I don't think really anybody is going to be going into this expecting all that much simply because Dragon Ball GT was itself a joke. And that was, after them just adapting the manga, or, they adapted the manga for Dragon Ball Z, and when they dropped it and did their own thing, GT was what they got. Now, this has Akira Toriyama, the original writer, working on it, apparently doing the original story and character concepts. But that's not actually that good of a reassurance, personally.
Well, yeah, because he himself has some kind of storytelling flaws, and even when I've been
He's a
trying to
wet
watch a bunch
blanket.
of, well, I've also been watching a lot of Kai, and I go, yeah, they've changed some pacing problems, but there are some really bad storytelling issues and really like expedient and contrived things that explain other things away, and everything's very easy. It's like, oh, don't worry, Bulma's dad built another spacecraft for me with also a whole bunch of training things inside. Oh, here's the sensu bean, everything. Like here's an explanation for like how they can get the character to one place to the next, and they have the character just standing in the middle of the room, like talking for 2 minutes to explain the logistics of how to get like a bunch of bullshit just out of the way, so there's no consequence.
Well, to be fair, a huge issue of what Toriyama is, he's a super creative guy in the sense that he's really good at coming up with certain concepts and stuff, but he's also, admittedly on his part, super lazy and also super influenced by his editors. Like he's unwilling to take a narrative stand.
Well,
in
yeah.
a sense, like if to kind
Well,
of go
again, there's no consequences to anything that happens, and so therefore he has to. Well, that's what I mean. Is like to taking a stand with a story is going, okay, this happened. These characters are dead. We just have to live with it. No, just bring them back.
Well,
but
that
doesn't-
aspect of it is fine in the sense like that's always been handled kind of like a goofy type thing because it's supposed to be lighthearted. The issue I have more in the sense like, say for example, with the second part of, not really the second part, but with the one portion of Dragon Ball Z, Goku was supposed to actually stay dead. Like, full up, we're going to focus on Goku's son. He spent all this time trying to build him up as his own character. They go into actually doing a lot of stuff focused on them. And, and basically trying to make him as being the main character who is going to solve, fighting Majin Buu. But then he drops it immediately because guess what? People weren't receiving, the new character, or not even the new character, they weren't taking in Gohan's, replacement, or Goku's replacement Gohan as much as they like Goku. People just wanted Goku to do everything, and that was what they were getting. So the editor got him to do that.
Yeah.
That's
well,
it.
That's what I mean by committing to consequences.
He builds up to it, and it's like, oh, actually, that failed because everybody kind of just wants Goku to do it.
Well, and that's what I mean is sticking to the fact that the character is dead and saying, okay, that's it. We have to just stick with it. Nope. We're not going to do that. We're just going to come
they
up
always
with an
gave
explanation
escape clauses, that kind of thing, anyways. Just because.
Well, yeah, and to me, that lowers the stakes of any of the dramatics and the action. But
I mean, it's not supposed to be super. I think super dramatic or a sense. It's again, it's an action anime. It's it's power fantasy. It's not supposed to be necessarily any deeper than that. I think it's just entertaining one. And looking at the original Dragon Ball, it was also pretty funny. But then
the original one was much more adventurous and humorous, and
sure, and
wasn't just a series of power levels one after the next.
Yeah, and that's a huge issue, and we'll see if that's the direction that they go with it. The movies and the other stuff that Toriyama's been doing with Dragon Ball, where he's been writing stuff for them just recently, that's been certainly a lot more on the comedic side of things, in the sense that it was willing to basically go, hey, whatever.
Yeah.
In that sort of sense, like, or just has been playing around with it a bit more. But then again, they also just are making a movie literally just like, oh, Frieza's back, and now Frieza's powerful because people like Frieza, which is kind of just like, this is another example of, Toriyama, you're so fucking easily pushed around by people.
So much pandering.
Yeah, and I suppose part of the issue with that is the sense that he's made a lot of comics and stuff since then, but none of them are popular. Like, none of them take off, and even Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z are not as popular, say, as One Piece is these days. He comes across as really just kind of like, look, I'm just kind of glad to be here. I'm glad to be making things when I can. I'll do whatever you guys want, so long as you actually give me money. I don't fucking care. Just whatever, You guys want Goku back? Fine. Don't want comedy anymore? I really wish I could do. Whatever. So long as I can still have the dog be king? Okay. Just the other funny aspect of that is the sense that he, like I said, he's also kind of lazy with certain aspects of things, where he's notoriously difficult to actually get to do certain aspects of his work in the sense of complex character designs. Like, there's certain, manga artists who are notorious for going insane with how detailed they go, even with, like, weekly stuff. He was kind of the exact opposite.
So he's a lot like the, what is it, the Hunter x Hunter guy.
Yeah, well, not in the sense like cutting corners, but in the sense like, you remember the character Cell from Dragon Ball Z, right? The Bugman kind of android thing?
Yeah.
The big green one. He's voiced by Norio Wakamoto in Japan.
Oh, right, yeah.
So he basically came to completely regret that character entirely after he concepted him, just because of the sense like, oh god, I don't like having to draw all the details on him. It's really annoying.
So here's a new form.
It's just basic. Well, that's part of it, but that's also the sense of like, oh, I made this weird bug thing. People don't like him as much. He's not, and it's like within like weeks, he's already moving away from that. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Like it's basically me like snap, snap, snap. We got to go to something more anime, more cool. Kids got to like this, super tight turnaround, that sort of thing. Where like people don't like this. Oh, I'm gonna really go make this.
He's just chasing the ratings.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, at the same time, I love Dragon Ball just for where it is in my childhood. I don't think it's super good, but it's super fascinating, and I don't know if I'll watch this. Well, I don't know. It depends how good or bad it is. If it's in the middle range, I probably won't care. If it's on either side of things, I'll probably watch it for a lark.
So it has to be either good or a disaster.
Or just interesting. I don't know. They made that Dragon Ball game recently that was just basically all fan service. That game was pretty cool.
Well, let's hope.
You go back in time, use time machine, and just fuck with timeline and stuff. You just like, oh, remember when Goku was fighting Vegeta? Yeah, your character was also there. He was also super helpful. You're just fucking with the timeline.
It's basically fan fiction, the game.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it's also the appropriate amount of irreverence that Dragon Ball Z deserves at this point, because it's kind of just like, whatever. The timeline's fucked anyways. Who cares? It's kind of that sort of thing. Like, if they insert a character here, does it matter that much? Not really. It's the appropriate amount of like, let's just have fun with it. So, anyways, yeah, we'll see. It might be terrible.
Speaking of Japan, your other piece of news.
So actually, two pieces of news is that since first off is that a little semi-tied into animation in the sense that the game studio or kind of media conglomerate Konami has been kind of going through a lot of weird stuff lately.
Konami, are you okay, Konami? You're not posting on your Facebook anymore, and you're not returning our calls. Is everything going okay with you, Konami? I mean, how's Hideo?
Well, unfortunately, I've split from Hideo. Things were going nice, but
yeah, because
I'm gonna burn all his clothes and throw it on the lawn.
I noticed that on all the photos, you've scratched out his eyes and removed his name from all your documents.
Well, fuck that guy. Remember that stuff we were gonna do with him and Guillermo del Toro? Fuck that. That's going to the fucking ground. It's fucking dead to me.
This is some severe. This is not just burning a bridge; it is salting the goddamn earth with phosphorus.
Yeah, so I think I can't remember who said it to me, but basically it's like the joke, and well, everybody kind of says that Japanese studios and Japanese media conglomerates don't get aggressive. The only form of aggressive that they have is passive aggressive.
Yeah, I was about to say.
So Konami is a media conglomerate that's has its kind of tentacles in a lot of things. The reason why we're talking about them here is the sense that one, gaming and animation are pretty tied, and two, they've got a lot involved with animation in the sense that they've actually funded a lot of anime and actually been dipping in production in the past. They actually were involved to some degree with, like, say, Gurren Lagann's production. They weren't, a major part of it, but they were one of the people funding it, and they also had some involvement in it. And
they're a big investor.
Certainly. And, well, they do have some, production side things as well. I think they were actually listed as under production for Gurren Lagann. I don't know what actual aspect of it they were. Maybe actually just, mild CG type stuff. Who knows? But they've also, do a lot of tie-in stuff with that sort of things. But they're involved with a lot of stuff also. The joke everybody makes, including myself, is the sense that there's probably some Yakuza elements to Konami, sense that they're really involved in, like, pachinko slots and pachinko market and making pachinko games and, really sleazy ass shit as well.
So all their next games are going to feature Enka Ballad stars.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's kind of just like, so the reason I'm bringing it is that they're moving away out of the gaming side of things and kind of refocusing entirely on cell phone and pachinko slot. And it wouldn't be surprising to me if we see this kind of reflected also in the animation side of things, because it basically means that they're definitely shoring themselves up on their super safe bets for whatever reason and kind of refocusing themselves. Yeah, it's probably just a term. They're doubling down on pachinko slots, really. So,
And it's a shame because I heard what was it, PT
Yep.
was the name of the demo, and
For
it
Silent
was getting
Hills.
it was getting a lot of really good press, and people thought it was extremely well directed. It was just
It was super interesting, and it was basically a pitch for the Silent Hills thing. And Silent Hills itself has been canceled, and they're actually just taking that free demo completely off their marketplace tomorrow. It's like no real cost for them actually having available. They're just taking it down because spite.
yeah, fuck you,
It's kind of
Kojima.
really
Yeah.
all it is at this point. Like all their actions, where they're just striking out, Kojima's name from documentations and like any sort of thing attributing to him. It comes across as really spiteful, and that's kind
And
of
petty.
a weird. It's real, yeah. It's
It's
kind of a weird
really
aspect
petty.
of their media conglomerates in Japan do that. It's super weird. There's no real benefit to them doing it. Like it's actively probably hurting their numbers.
Well, it's their image. It's their branding is the positive associations people had with Konami were definitely tied to their partnership with Kojima, and by just shunning him as much as they are, it's definitely going to be hurting their image.
Yeah, and who knows what was happening there. I mean, there's a lot of, maybe contractual type stuff. Kojima made a lot of really expensive games as well, so maybe this is just them refocusing entirely out of that market. Who knows? One of the weird things I saw is that with them going super heavy on pachinko slots, one of the new pachinko slots I saw that they announced, and I saw this because people were joking about it and just linking it as kind of an example of, look at the stuff that Konami is making these days. They're making a Gun X Sword pachinko slot.
I don't know what Gun X Sword is.
That's that one it's an mecha anime from 2004 that was middlingly popular that just existed to basically make fun of Gundam Seed.
Huh.
It's a weird choice. That's why I'm just kind of confused. Like, what?
An 11-year-old series that wasn't all that popular and didn't really spawn a franchise. Yeah, that is definitely a weird one to pick.
I really liked Gun X Sword, but it was not a franchise. I don't think it actually moved, the meter at all in the sense of people actually paying attention to it. Like it didn't. I don't know if it's sold at all, or they think that there's a market here. I mean, Japan's big on like niche marketing, but are they going to be able to say like, hey, there's enough people out there that like Gun X Sword to make a pachinko slot explicitly just for them based around it? It's super weird. I don't think they actually even produced it or necessarily involved in it. Maybe they funded it to some degree, but I think it was.
Well, maybe it was one of the assets that they actually have some kind of legal ownership over, because now with the Kojima stuff, they really can't use a lot of what he was working on and other things like that. So they have to just grab whatever they got.
Yeah, because I think it was AIC Asta that produced it. So
one of the not good animation studios.
I mean, it looked fine at the time. Things like those studios have wavered so much about their quality.
Yeah.
And they put a fair bit of money into Gun X Sword to make it look. It wasn't fantastic, but it looked pretty decent. It's just such a weird choice. I don't know what Konami's up to these days. I don't get what they think about these days. I don't understand them. They make me sad. I really like Castlevania. They make me sad. I really like Metal Gear. They make me sad.
Well, like, here's the other thing is, like, there's been talks for so long about Metal Gear as a movie franchise, and, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen with any of that.
I don't know. Well, I mean, like I said, maybe they're probably just moving entirely out of just doing that sort of thing. Maybe they'll just stop making games entirely. They wouldn't be the first. I mean, Capcom has been moving in that direction as well, and, Capcom is another one that's had a lot of involvement in animation to some degree, and they've been moving out of that area too.
Yeah.
It's kind of just the modern, reality of, hey, cell phones are what sell. You can make money off of pachinko slots. I don't know. Cell phone games is really a lot of the big movers. And you're kind of actually seeing that a lot with, animation out in Japan. That a lot of stuff's being tied into that. And I have to wonder to some degree how much this is also tied in the sense that, realistically speaking, their market's only dwindling in the sense that the Japanese population is dwindling.
Well, that and also console ownership is not as high as it used to be because
Yeah.
the consoles are much more expensive. People don't have as much leisure
Well,
time or the money to do so. Because
And I'm just saying that's the thing. It's a little more the sense like it's a realistic risk. The sense that making stuff aimed at kids doesn't actually make as much sense anymore, just because they're rapidly running out of kids. Actually, like they're not running out of kids, but it's not necessarily keeping up with like the actual inflation.
well,
in the
yeah,
sense that it's not so easy. And
But the thing with the kids market there is that they can easily export that over here. I mean, what is it? Nintendo Level 5 is doing their kind of Pokemon answer over here now. So like Yokai Watch is coming over to the US.
Though. And that was fucking. And they're also handling that shitty. I'm just gonna throw that out there. What the fuck?
Yeah, it's weird. Over there, it's one of the biggest things ever at the moment.
Even that's a good example of something that's difficult to localize because one of the things is that how do you
It's
localize
yokai?
yokai? That's such a weird concept to kind of explain to people. Since like, well, they're kind of like monsters, but they're
kind of like
spooks.
Ghosts, but they're also not. Yeah,
they're
but
kind of like. I mean, you could translate it as demons, but they're not all bad. Like they're kind of creepy crawlies or spooks, I guess. We could call them like cryptids, but that'd be weird because you want to be associated with that bullshit.
Well, what's really funny is, what was it? The newest one that they're coming out with takes place in America. So all the monsters are like hamburgers and cheerleaders and NASA astronauts because that's what America is.
That's especially weird because there are a lot of like folklore creatures over here that they could actually just do. Like, hey, Japan loves,
Well, we have a ton of things from Europe, and then we have the First Nations here. We have a lot of the South American traditions. It's like a lot of stuff that kind of combines here in terms of folklore and things like that. But nope, hamburgers, cheerleaders, and NASA.
I mean, Japan loves the Flatwoods monster. That's their depiction of space aliens. Typically, is the Flatwoods monster.
Huh.
Like if you actually see it, like for example, if you look at just to make a really quick video game aside, it's like Majora's Mask, the alien things that invade. It's just the Flatwoods monster. They just love that They love that art design of what that looks like, and just aliens. Like anytime they draw aliens, half the time it's a Flatwoods monster.
Well, Atlas likes the Mothman.
Yeah, well,
they've used that design.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that sort of thing. Like, there's a lot of stuff that they could dip into, and Atlas is obviously a lot more. Apparently, is a lot more in tune to that sort of thing than say Level 5 is.
Well, they do their research on world folklore and religion really like into some obscure texts, but that's just because they're interested in that.
Yeah.
Level 5 is Professor Layton, and
Level 5 is also weird in the sense that they're also going entirely directly into only the mobile market as well.
Yeah.
We'll see what that sort of ad impact it has, because there's been a lot of anime based off of Level 5 stuff too. So, they're I mean, that could be a benefit in the sense that if it gives some more money, I suppose.
Well, I love their aesthetic. I love the type of drawing styles and their collaboration with Ghibli. I mean, they make some of the best visual games. Their gameplay sometimes suffers, as with that Ghibli tie-in game. Yes. I'm being charitable, okay?
I mean, those Professor Layton games are pretty good, but otherwise, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, well, that Ghibli collaboration game was one of the best looking games on the PS3. Of just artistically, the gameplay was just not.
Yeah, it was an interesting aesthetic.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's get off this video game thing. But
yes, and into your the best news.
Yes, the most important news of the day for animation. So, the United States and Japan have recently concluded, as part of an official delegation, a number of defense deals and whatnot. And the TPP, President Professor Barack Obama said, in talking, to Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, that this is a delegation that, kids in the United States should be thanking Japan for important things such as karate, karaoke, manga, and, of course, anime and emojis. So Barack Obama our president has voiced his approval for anime, which is a dark path, because anime should not be approved.
Well, Obama can finally take that catchphrase, "Thanks, Obama," and twist it onto Japan. Thanks, Japan.
Fun times.
It's odd.
Such a weird thing.
Of Japanese accomplishments. It's anime, manga, emojis, and also
karate.
his pronunciation. Interesting pronunciation of. It was neither anime or anime. It was neither. It was somewhere off the spectrum entirely. And I don't even know. I couldn't even tell he even said the word manga until I saw like the text of it.
Yeah, I've always been a manga boy. I like to say manga, not manga. It's just me.
Well, you say robots too.
Well, that's just me just fucking with people, that I am more than capable of saying robots. It's just that robots don't deserve most of the time to be referred to as robots. They just deserve to be referred to as robots because that's
Well, it
as much
sounds
as
like
as much as I like
Chobits.
robots, they don't deserve that level of respect.
All right. So let's get to the subject this week, which is the Critic.
It stinks.
It stinks. It stinks. Yes, Jay, everything stinks. So, The Critic, a little bit of background. It was a series that only ran for 2 seasons, about 23 episodes. It premiered in 1994 and then ran until 1995, where it was summarily canceled. It switched networks, which is pretty rare for a TV series, and it was originally on ABC. And at the time, ABC had already done, oh God, what was it? They did Fish Police, Capital Critters, and Family Dog had already been attempted and failed terribly, and then The Critic came out. So like the thing is The Simpsons was this big hit, and so all the other networks were like, oh shit, this animation thing is like really big, so we need our own show. And so they went through and they tried to hire out all these previous Simpsons writers to come up with these shows, and Al Jean and Mike Reiss, who were previously showrunners and writers for The Simpsons, pitched them this show. They didn't even have like a pilot out or anything like that, and ABC picked it up. And so it didn't seem to do well in ABC because I don't think people really associated ABC with that type of animation. So it was then transferred over to Fox for season 2. And even though the ratings were actually fairly good, it was canceled most likely due to network politics because around the time when it was supposed to be renewed, a new head of Fox had come in. And the thing was whenever there's like a new head of these studios, they often do this kind of like power play where they'll just cancel the previous person's pet projects to just spite them. And that was kind of what happened here.
Fox does that an awful lot in general.
It does it an awful lot, and that's because they were just constantly switching people and trying to figure out what they wanted to do, and just throwing whatever they could at the wall in the slim chance that they'll get a new hit. I mean, The Simpsons just came out of nowhere, and it pretty much saved their network. So, as I said, the creators were Al Jean, Mike Reiss, showrunners on The Simpsons. I think their seasons that they actually did the main show running for was seasons 3 and 4.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I think Al Jean then returned again to write for the show, and I think he was the showrunner for quite a few of the double-digit seasons. The animation was done by Film Roman, so they were the ones that had also done a lot of work on The Simpsons. The production design was done by, I think, 4 different people. Some of them are pretty famous now. So we got David Silverman, who is pretty much one of the main guys who did the visuals for The Simpsons. He had also worked on things for Pixar. I think he did some sequences for Monsters, Inc. and also for Road to El Dorado, which I think was DreamWorks. So he did some stuff for that. We had Rich Moore, who has worked on Simpsons, Futurama. He's very famously known as the director of Wreck-It Ralph, and he's, I think, co-directing. I don't know how many. It seems like they're having like 3 directors on this thing. For Disney, it's called Zootopia. So a lot of these people have moved on to bigger things. Everett Peck was the creator of Duckman, if you remember any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also wrote on Rugrats. The only one I couldn't find any info on was David Butler, who was credited with a lot of the tertiary character design and some of the backgrounds. And here's the other thing with the show is that like it had a amazing cast. I mean, you got John Lovitz, who was pretty much perfect for this part, but it was like a who's who of all the best voice actors in the business during the 90s and even still to this day. You got Maurice LaMarche, who's just the guy is goddamn incredible. I mean, he like there's episodes where he's doing 27 different characters.
Yep.
So, and then there is Christine Cavana, Nancy Cartwright, Charles Napier, Kath Soucie, and Tress MacNeille. I mean, like, these are all actors and actresses that are still in doing animation today. Well, except for Christine Cavana, who recently passed away, but
Rip.
these were all definitely heavy hitters in the voice acting community, and there's also some other actors and actresses they brought in for other parts. I mean, just it was a cast to die for.
Yeah.
So let's go over what the premise is. So the Critic is about a TV critic, and so this is definitely a product of its time period where movie critics were given TV shows. I mean, Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel having that famous TV series.
And this is basically a parody of them outright.
To some extent. He doesn't have a partner, but he has kind of a fairly... It's odd. The show treats it both as low rated, but he's also well known at the same time.
So yeah, they're kind of inconsistent in that degree, in the sense that it doesn't really make a lot of sense if you think about it much. It's just kind of more as useful.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say the character is kind of like a Pauline Kael-like figure, at least in the film criticism thing, where he's very over the top and extremely negative with a lot of his criticism. He never likes anything. And to be fair, a lot of the movies he has to watch are very much
really shitty.
Yeah, really shitty. But sometimes in very funny ways. So a lot of the movies he's watching are kind of parodies and mashups of existing kind of... They did a pretty good job, I think, of selecting which films to parody, because many of them are kind of considered classics. So they're kind of recognizable, even though it's been something like 20 years since the show aired.
Yeah, that side of it actually held up remarkably well. You wouldn't think it. You think it'd be the thing that would age the most, given that, say, pop culture references out of like Family Guy tend to have aged out very quickly. These actually hold up relatively well in the sense that they seem to have seen, like, okay, here's the big cinematic, watermarks that we can touch on, even out of the recent stuff in the early 90s. And I mean, at least from this standpoint, in this point in time, the jokes in that sense certainly hold up.
Yeah. And the thing is like, so besides the pop culture stuff, like, there is quite a bit of political humor in here. And some of it is difficult because, like, I had to go back and look up Ross Perot's campaign in 1992 because
that did not hold up well.
I could not for the life of me remember the name of his running mate. It was James Stockdale, who is just basically famous for looking like a confused old man and blaming gridlock on everything. And that's the source of, like, a lot of the jokes there. There's quite a bit of Clinton humor. So, like, it's kind of nostalgic because I a lot of what I was watching as a kid when I had time to watch TV almost all the time, a lot of Clinton jokes. Animaniacs would make
You've
Clinton
just got
jokes.
nostalgia for Ross Perot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember All That on Nickelodeon did tons of Ross Perot jokes.
What a weird thing to think about, Ross Perot jokes.
Yeah. Some of my favorites are some of the Ronald Reagan jokes.
Well, those are eternal.
Yeah, those will... Well, it also helps that I'm a hardcore lefty at heart, so... So I definitely enjoy the Ronald Reagan stuff. And I think...
I'm going to cut out that where you say, I definitely enjoy Ronald Reagan. You're dead to all your friends.
He was the greatest president ever. Shut up, Nancy.
This episode is going out to the Gipper. But that's one major part of it. But the other part of it is that Jay is himself middle-aged and extremely dumpy, and a lot of the plots seem to be focused more on that aspect of him.
Well, here's the thing. He's actually not even middle-aged. He's 35.
Is he really? They make him out to seem a lot older than that. Huh.
He does seem a lot older than that, but he mentions, I think, a couple times, like, I'm 35 years old. And I was like, really? Really?
He looks like he's like in his mid 40s, upper 50s, or
he really
50s,
well because he's balding. He's definitely fat, and it's just he has a son, a failed marriage. I mean, everything about it.
Well, you can basically prefix anything about things that he possesses, and you can just kind of affix "failed" in front of it. That's kind of a lot of his. That's kind of a lot of his, personality or his identity. Is something like. He's kind of failing at his film criticism thing. It's all he's got, but he's not that popular, and he doesn't get along well with it. He's failing to get along with his family. He's failing really to, get along too well with his son. His son's pretty generic, but, he's not antagonistic or anything. All of his personal relationships are failing. He's failing to stay fit or healthy, and he's just a big fucking failure.
Yeah. At the same
that's a
time,
lot of the
though,
jokes.
I mean, at the same time, though, there are they don't undercut him in certain ways where he is intellectually correct about a lot of things. So
Sure.
they don't make him completely pompous, which would, I think, put the character.
He's not an idiot at any.
Yeah, he's not an idiot. I mean, he's sometimes wrong about things, but they don't do the thing where they make him not just fat, dumpy, and nobody likes him, but also pompous and incorrect and blind. It's like, well,
he's only half of that.
Yeah, he's only half. I mean, he's pompous, but he's not wrong at the same time. And here's kind of like the odd worldview I think the show has. I mean, so some of the strongest critique and humor I think really comes at the expense of media and the structures that make it up. So like Hollywood and television, the network he works for, Philips Broadcasting, which was formerly Philips Chicken and Waffles, I think, was on the side of the building is what it originally was. Now it's this huge, Ted Turner style empire. I think his boss, Duke Phillips, is kind of a satire on Ted Turner.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So it does a lot of like a critique on the cynical marketing and lazy decision making of the people in power. And the issue I have with it though, and I don't want to say problematic because I think people don't understand how that word works, but the difficulty of their critique is at times that it claims that the media underestimates the intelligence of the public, but then at the same time, the show portrays like a massive swaths of the public as being dim-witted and easily amused.
Yeah.
And so it's trying to have its cake and eat it too. It's trying to say, well, the public deserves better movies, and a lot of the decision making is very reductionist and is frankly insulting to a large amount of people, and it underestimates intelligence. But then at the same time, it portrays it as being, well, no, they're justified. People will buy into anything and are slack-jawed idiots most of the time and easily amused by simple violence.
Yeah, it wants to have its cake and eat it too, in that sense that, it pushes for the sense of like, oh, you could make more intelligent films, or stuff. You could make, a Citizen Kane, but then they feel the need to make these gags of like, duh, I like the dumb movie because it's fun. In the sense that that's also, to some degree, also a criticism or part of the actual aspect of the commentary on the critic as a, character and as a, an art and a profession, in the sense that it fails to capture the sense that sometimes people just like dumb films because it's fun. Like, criticism really is bad at kind of capturing that aspect of things. Like, a dumb action movie might not be critically that, worthwhile or worth discussing or analyzing, but it's super popular and it's got a point and a purpose. So, but it's hard to get a feel that they're actually going for that deliberately in that sense. They might be.
The show ends up not really coming out with a thesis at the end.
No.
Like, its point of view kind of is ad hoc, or just at the purpose of when it needs to be able to tell a joke at a given time.
Yeah, it's certainly, in the sense, it's not. It has the potential to be a kind of comedy cartoon built heavily around the general premise of, critic and criticism. But
or art, yeah.
Yeah, but instead it often feels the need to actually be more a cartoon and a comedy, a sitcom built around Jay himself. Where it just kind of goes for the gags in that sense, where it's not actually going for anything broader than that. It feels so much of a need to kind of... So much of its actual kind of joke real estate and kind of, episode real estate is built around the fact that Jay is fat and a lazy sack of shit.
To some extent, I'm a little bit more charitable to it in that I think that there are some strong aspects to the character. I think that there is... His struggle is relatable, at least on an emotional level. So, yes, you can't necessarily relate to him as, physically or as a background because he is an adopted son of these very wealthy parents who will come back to them later. But the desire for validation and understanding from others is a pretty universal struggle for a lot of people. And I think the show, when it wants to, will mine that for some pretty good conflict. And additionally, Jay's search for love is played equally for laughs and also pathos, meaning that when it needs to, it will let some time for his rejection and his kind of loneliness to breathe. So you actually kind of feel like, oh, wow, he's a character that is reacting to his situation. And to me, this feels like it's the influence of the early Simpsons writing experience of the creators here. When the show used to really kind of understand how character conflict makes each episode feel more like a complete experience with a story that keeps your attention, rather than just being like a set piece to hang a whole bunch of jokes and references. So like it's kind of like I would say The Critic is a huge precursor to shows like Family Guy in that it does a lot of pop culture references, it does a lot of extended fantasy sequences, it does a lot of experimental humor, but the big difference, I think, is that this was kind of taking those aspects that The Simpsons already kind of had and expanding them, because The Simpsons had these types of, you know, extended fantasy sequences and pop culture references. It's just that this one kind of magnified them a lot more, and because he wasn't as a part of kind of like a regular family, it wasn't doing that kind of family bonding background to it. And the reason Family Guy doesn't do that nearly as well is because that show is much more preoccupied about being edgy and shocking people and trying to push the boundaries of decency as much as they can as the source of humor, rather than kind of going, okay, well, here's a character, here's this experience, they live in a heightened reality, and let's generate gags off of their experiences and their observations and at their expense. Family Guy's kind of like, well, here's kind of like a baseline plot premise, but it's really just a vehicle for nonsensical, non-related gags that we've just come up with. It's like, imagine if someone tried to take an episode of Robot Chicken and structure a plot around the characters making those references.
Sure.
Like, I think the Critic
difference
integrates a lot of that a much better than Family Guy does.
Sure, but at the same time, also comparing it back to Simpsons, I think the Simpsons handle sort of the characters much better in the sense that
Yes.
for as much as Homer, for example, is a huge idiot, or as much as Bart is a huge asshole, they still give a degree of pathos in the sense of like, look, they can act like jerks sometimes, or be like completely just obnoxious, but they're still fundamentally good people at heart, maybe.
Or at least they mean well. I think
There's more pathos at least for them, and I don't think that they actually give enough of that for Jay, because so much of their gags are just simply, boy, Jay
he gets
sure
crapped
sucks.
on a lot. Yeah.
Or he does things that like the gags are like Jay does something that is really just completely unlikable, and the only times that they actually
strange. Yeah.
Yeah, the only time that they really go out of their way to kind of like elevate him is in comparison to other people around him that are worse. Which is a weird way to get you to try to like and relate to a character.
Well, I disagree. I think there are actually quite a few moments of genuine pathos for the character, or pathos, depending on how you want to pronounce it. His interactions with his son and how he really wants to support him and do right by him speaks to me of kind of early Simpsons Homer, not latter-day Simpsons Homer, where,
sure,
yes, he's dumb and he is ill-equipped to do his parenting job well, but he still means well and tries to help him and give him solace and things like that. They just don't do that enough, and many of the other characters are too shallow to work with. I mean, they'll give Jay a few of those moments, but pretty much the rest of the cast never gets to that level.
I think
and also, well, his interactions with his mother in a couple episodes get a little bit of that conflict, and you kind of see his side, even though he behaves in really screwed up ways, and you also see why she would resent him on some level. They kind of play that pretty well in one of my favorite episodes where his mother writes a children's book based off of him called The Fat Little Pig.
Fantastic.
That's one of my favorite episodes because it has the pop culture references, but it has a mother and a child story that is kind of understandable. So there's emotional content going on in it. You have a lot of really great experimental gags going on in it as well. So I think that's one of my favorite episodes in general, because it catches that nice mixture of emotion and humor that really made a lot of the Simpsons episodes classic.
The thing is, though, like even that episode that you're mentioning, that episode itself was basically the book that she wrote is actually about Jay and called The Fat Little Pig.
Yes.
I'm just saying, like, that's funny, but at the same time, it's yet another gag that's entirely built around the fact that Jay is unfit and unlikable in certain aspects.
Well, there's a great little gag in there where they talk about how it's kind of like there's a little bit of a passive aggression on her part as well, because
Sure.
like they show a passage
That
where
aspect
it's like,
of it's great.
"Hey, mother, I'm going to quit college and become a film critic. Oh, why don't you rip out my liver and make it into a scrumptious pate?" And it's kind of played for laughs, but it's like, well, like it's his decision at the same time, and this is her passive aggression expressing itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they did a pretty good job of balancing it. Yes, the entire show, I think one of the big critiques you can have on it is that some of its vaudevillian humor is extremely old-fashioned. I mean, they definitely go to the Jay is fat and eats a lot well way too often. And I think some of the other things where he breaks the fourth wall, looks at the camera, and makes a really bad pun or a really random Jewish reference.
Well, they go all the way to since he's adopted, he's actually adopted and Jewish. He is
to
Jewish.
this waspy family. Yeah,
That's part of the jokes that they go for. And though that aspect of it is also a little bit weird that he has like all they kind of go for like he's got quote unquote stereotypical Jewish vocal mannerisms at times.
Even though there's no way he would have picked those up.
Yeah, it's. I mean, to be fair.
They just wanted to make a bunch of Jewish jokes, I guess.
Yeah, to be fair, coming in with me being so critical of this, I only watched this actually relatively recently because, I've got friends who are into it, and so I've kind of caught it here and there and then watched more of it. So I never actually saw it when it's airing. I think just some of those gags may just not have aged particularly well, and so I'm kind of, coming into it in a sense like, wow, fat jokes at this point, like fat jokes have gotten a bit tiring, haven't they? Like, well, maybe not at the time, this was only a little bit after The Simpsons was a thing, and while I don't think The Simpsons exactly pioneered the fat joke because
well
they
had exhausted the well pretty effectively by that point.
The Simpsons and Family Guy, and even to a lesser degree, Futurama also even did sort of sense of dipping into the whole hey. People, main characters sure are lazy and like eating and being, sacks of shit.
That's like a standard sitcom trope outside of animation as well.
Tiring, though.
It is tiring, and I think that's one of the things that's a valid criticism of this is that for every really inventive and smart joke they'll make about a movie or literary figure, they'll balance it out with just a really lazy Jay needs to be lifted up by a crane to get onto a stage.
Or the fact that like it's kind of funny that they literally call it to this aspect in the opening where they just literally just have him walk onto the the ice skating thing and like, oh, all the ice broke because he's so fat. Wow,
I thought that's actually one of my favorite gags of the opening.
I don't know.
Well, just because it's so. It could not even. You could also interpret it not necessarily as a fat joke, just like he happens to be very unlucky, just stepped on the thing that caused this fracture. Sure. I love the telephone gags at the beginnings too.
Those are good. See, that's the weird thing. Like, for as much as I'm being a bit harsh here, I fully acknowledge that. I'm kind of just taking that kind of aim. There's a lot of really fantastic gag writing in here. Like, there's some really just absolutely just like eternal jokes in here that just like really stand up extremely well.
Eminently quotable lines, just things that I don't know how they came up with them.
There's a reason why this is such a kind of a...
it's a cult favorite.
Cult favorite, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a reason why it is that. And I'm not certainly denying any of the reasons why that is, but there's some aspects of it that's kind of just like... you can tell why they kind of... I wouldn't say it's why it got canceled, but certainly not why it didn't become a breakout hit.
Why it never became like a Simpsons.
Sure.
It never reached that height.
Yeah.
My argument, though, would be just like how The Simpsons really didn't find its stride until I think around the third or fourth season and then on. I think this show, if given a little bit more time, would have worked better. I think they started addressing that in the second season when they added Alice as a kind of a balancing mechanism to humanize Jay a lot more.
Sure.
It's just that it was ordered by then. It was
too late.
Yeah, unfortunately. And I think that was a good choice on their part by giving an Alice character, and they kind of made him a lot more understandable, I think, and also they kind of made him a bit more charming. Like his interactions with Alice are they're low key, and they did a pretty good job of setting up that relationship over a series of a few episodes.
Hmm.
So I think that was kind of like one of the better things they had done in terms of trying to soften it a little bit from necessarily just being a series of jokes at his expense, because after a while a punching bag stops being funny.
Yeah.
It becomes just a dead horse essentially.
Not to mention, like, so much of comedy is kind of about, like a lowering of stature to some degree, where, the kind of a
Well,
lot
it's
of
the whole idea of punching up versus punching
exactly.
down. Yeah.
And the thing is that Jay, they don't really make him that much of a standpoint where he's like up and he's kind of got his high horse, and it's kind of funny to see him knocked off of it. But it doesn't make us also root for him though. And a lot of the episode plot lines are built around, hey, we got to root for him because he's the protagonist still. They don't really set him up against unless they set him up against something that's
even more of an authority figure than he is. So like
sure.
when he has conflicts with Duke, for example, Duke becomes a much bigger target of the show's satire and I think ire.
Sure.
I mean,
and that's
Jay's
weird.
an easy target, but the show doesn't really hate Jay. I think it's just doesn't know necessarily what to. It's kind of like, oh, here's our safe space, making a bunch of jokes about how Jay is ugly and fat and things like that. That's easy space for them. It's a lot riskier to do very sharp, pointed satire, and that's usually its most harsh criticisms are directed much higher than Jay at targets with much more authoritative power, which is the idea of punching up.
Yeah, interestingly, it feels like they're too picky at Jade at times, where I kind of like it doesn't make me feel bad for him, but the sense like it's kind of like, oh, maybe we could not just constantly just destroy him on every sense.
There's better targets, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, and interesting. You bring up, Duke. Duke is a inherently unlikable character. That's his character, is to be an unlikable kind of, Ted Turner stand-in.
He's charming but unlikable.
But that's the weird thing, is that he's supposed to be more unlikable, but he's ultimately actually more likable, not as a person, but just that he's fun.
Well, he's dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he gets stuff done, and he's an asshole, but he's the kind of asshole you kind of go like, yeah, that's entertaining. I could watch him being an asshole to Jay. Like, ironically, it makes you root for him being more of an asshole to Jay, which is, I don't know if that's what they're going for, but that's kind of what I end up going for. It's like episodes with Duke were kind of just like, yeah, kind of what he's doing. Wouldn't want to hang out with him in real life, but it's kind of just like, yeah.
Well, I think that comes to the fact that he's a dynamic character that has both a lot of victories and a few defeats in the show. And he's not, the show just doesn't crap on him 24/7.
Yeah.
It will do some big jabs at who he is and what he represents as he's a stand-in. But the thing at the same time, it doesn't do it constantly at the same rate. Because sometimes he is the authority figure and he gets his way.
And I suppose he's
the show gives him a purpose and a priority in certain situations. Whereas Jay, it doesn't really know what to do with him sometimes. And maybe that's a strength in that they don't want to make him too proactive of a character or too much of a sad sack of a character, so they have to kind of do a varying level of the two. But at the same time, sometimes it feels like the show has a difficulty balancing out how much they want to poke fun at Jay or use Jay as the cipher through which the viewer sees the world.
See, I don't think that's the issue. Is that I don't think they do that enough. Is the sense that they don't actually use him as kind of the audience, stand in enough. Like they occasionally do stuff. Like I was thinking, for example, like there's a lot of plots that are based around him kind of refusing stuff that Duke at the station, is
pushing on him,
wants him to do stuff that he considers morally wrong, which is interesting, in a sense, like, yeah, that certain people could relate to that. But often his reasoning for doing so, Jay, is also completely unlikable as well.
or it doesn't form enough of the conflict, so it doesn't feel like it is a episode long conflict. So, like, for example, what is it? It's the chewing tobacco thing in the trucking episode. The episode isn't about him fighting that. he gives up that fight almost immediately, and this is just kind of the show's way of, okay, we want him to do this trucking episode, so we need to find a way for him to not be at the job anymore, and then have him become a trucker.
Though the gags that they did tied to that are pretty good. With
Oh yeah,
the guy
like
who
I'm not going to
replaces
be
them
your
and stuff, and
or Rex Reed, the other critics. And then they also did a great thing of like, oh, I won't be the corporate America, I won't be your shill anymore. Well, here's your rig, Jay, and it's the same brand that he refused to advertise on the show. I think it's like Savvy Indian.
Exactly, it used to be
Chewy
Savage
tobacco.
Indian, but they wouldn't let him keep it that way. See, there's some really good gags in here. Like the writing in that sense is good.
And it's really great because that is still applicable today when you're talking about like the Redskins controversy and all. I mean, so much of the show's criticism is still pretty prescient today. I mean, a lot of what I think maybe the specifics of certain critiques of the types of films that were being made in the 90s and the schlock that was, the details of that have changed. But the system in which that is created has remained in place, or at least the thought process behind the creation of that stuff has really stayed in place.
And that's a lot of the stuff I think that's kind of aged the best in kind of like in a general sense, beyond the really good kind of like just kind of actual
gags,
sitcom gags. Like there's some gags that held up really well.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff tied to Jay's parents has held up extraordinarily well. Not necessarily the character archetypes that they represent, but just the jokes about their personalities have actually just kind of hold up in a general sense of like, oh, that's actually really funny.
Well, I think a lot of the lines that his mother says make a lot of sense, especially now in the post-2008 world, where her original book before she makes the children's book was going to be what was it? Why we should blast the poor off to space.
Yeah, well, that's why she made the book, was to fund that.
Well, no, she didn't make the book to fund that. She then
she said that she was going to use all the proceeds.
Oh, the proceeds,
from it
yeah, the proceeds then go to it, yeah, as a nice callback. And then there's some great that whole episode.
I'm just thinking of the sense like his dad's also just like a kind of a huge idiot weirdo, like kind of the rich weirdo that you can be with being
the eccentric billionaire essentially.
And he's a former governor and former ambassador, and he's been involved in politics and stuff. And then Jay obviously is nothing like any of that.
He has some really great lines, but at the same time, it can get really tiring because he is so unhinged. He's a lot like Gurr from Invader Zim in that there's a lot of randomness, but I like him much better than Gurr because it's at least somewhat contextualized.
I don't know, like they're kind of going from like kind of a political jokes with him more. I mean, whereas Gurr is pure monkey cheese. As they say.
Yeah, entirely.
Business.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Is I think his dad does very irreverent things that are definitely what some people would consider crazy, but they're at least somewhat contextualized to the situation. So it's like he wants to go help his wife because she's feeling unfulfilled, so he goes to ask his neighbor, which is kind of a satire on home improvement.
I love that joke. That is like one of my favorite
gags. It turns out it's an owl, and it's like oh Wilson, my wife is in the dumps. Who? My wife Eleanor. Who? My wife Eleanor. Like, and then there's like the when he talks about when he was dating Eleanor, and the flashback is done in this Popeye animation style.
Yeah,
and he drinks gin instead of spinach. There's like, a lot of that stuff is so well observed. Like the satire they do, even when they're mashing up a bunch of movies, is they kind of keep the spirit of the movie. They're just doing a very small twist on it.
Mm-hmm.
And man, the impressions are amazing.
Yeah,
like,
that
Maurice
aspect's
LaMarche
fantastic.
does some of the, I mean, God, the voice work. I mean, the Orson Welles bits are just.
That is.
Oh.
Did people get those jokes at the time? Like, were
people
familiar with like the Orson Welles kind of like train wreck?
I think a lot of people were by that point. I mean, if you were in your 30s, you probably have heard about Orson Welles in some level. Even as a kid, I kind of knew a little bit about him. I didn't know about the fact that he was having to do commercials because he wasn't allowed to make movies anymore, or at least he couldn't get investors.
Well, that's
so
what I mean. Like, most people are
could.
familiar with his earlier works, the fantastic works. I was wondering, like, were people familiar with his like late career kind of shittiness
Decline.
in the sense that he became such a joke?
Well, like, yeah, I mean, it's really
And now they have a lot of
it's
jokes
it's
that
a
are
tragic
that.
thing, yeah.
Like I think they do. Am I I don't want to say anything because it's actually been a while since I watched all the episodes. Did they actually make a joke that was outright just the wine commercials, or am I
There's a
misremembering?
couple of them. There in that there is he does the video will for the parents. So he's
Hmm.
just, he's being paid to read the living will, and he tries to make it into a horror thing. Then he's off to do a fish stick commercial, and he's like, "Oh, I found one," or like, "Oh, good, there's one still left in my beard. They're even better raw."
See,
And
I
then
wonder how much people.
there's the rosebud. Yes, rosebud frozen peas filled with green penis. Oh, that's terrible. It's, like, there's a bunch of, like, yeah, there's the wine commercial, and then there's a bunch of other things. I mean, in general, he was having to try to make money where he could because he wasn't getting funding, and the whole thing is
And he
kind
was
of
also a huge
steep.
alcoholic.
Well, yeah, the whole thing was just steeped in tragedy, and I
Hmm.
think this is
And
the
I'm sure
more
they're going into.
intellectual jokes that they're making about, like, people like Pauline Kael or other criticism, and some of the artists that they mention, and a lot of the political references they're making are, I think, above what you would have seen in, like, a Simpsons or a Family Guy, which
They're a
might
bit
have been a
higher
little.
brow, yeah.
They're a bit higher brow and kind of require a little bit of understanding about the background of, like, film history to some level, but they also did a lot of the pop culture movies. So, like, they would do Star Trek jokes like Hee Haw, The Next Generation.
That is such a good joke. I love that joke still. Ah, and they do a lot of really
I
good,
mean, and that's just a mashup, really. Like, just fundamentally a mashup, but it works somehow. Like, they made it work where it didn't feel like it was lazy. Like, they knew how to address that absurdity to make it the right tone so it doesn't feel like it's lazy, but at the same time, like, what? How did they come up with some of this stuff?
I think one of my favorite weird kind of not tied to the pop culture gags is the fact that his son is attending United Nations like
The UN
elementary
school. Yeah.
school, and that's such a dumb thing. But I like it conceptually, and it's often used to kind of dumb ends. But I find it really funny. I don't know why.
Well, they
Maybe,
do a lot of really strange stereotype jokes. The kid, and the best gag is that kid from Easter Island whose head is literally a stone monolith.
I do approve of that. Yeah. Like I don't know, it's like it's a cheap source of gags in the sense that it gives them just like a bunch of like minor stereotype gags that they can make, like the sense like, oh, I can't remember if it's the German or the Russian student there, like on like sports day is just just roided up, just like a
Oh,
buff like
she
middle
was
aged,
from an Eastern European
which are
country.
going for like kind of the kind of stereotype of the Russian athlete type thing,
Yeah, yeah.
which is cheap, but
Or like
yeah.
the game that doesn't make sense where you're pushing a giant ball into a tiny goal that it cannot possibly fit, and he's like, "Oh, don't worry, my country is only like a destination for a reclusive actor," and I think it's like Marlon Brando, and they're trying to shove him into it through a doorway so he can get inside, and that's the origin of this game. God, there's a lot of Al Pacino jokes, a lot of Marlon Brando jokes. It's really just it's interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
just seeing who those celebrities were at the time. And again, I think they picked their targets well. Well, and well, humor aside, let's also talk about the visuals here. I I think there's some really strong. I love the character design style. All the characters have really unique facial shapes and body types, and I mean it. The characters are very different from each other.
Mm.
Whereas, like, if you look at the Simpsons world, there's very much a formula. And so I definitely appreciated the character designs and the overall production design. But I think my favorite part of this whole series is the color and style of the backgrounds.
Right.
They're beautiful pieces. Like, they're these kind of watercolor ones. They're relatively muted, so they kind of have this real world grounding, even though the kind of reality is fairly heightened and it's kind of silly at times. But the backgrounds are just often very cinematically done. They're just the color design very thoughtful. It's the anti Simpsons in that regard, where the Simpsons definitely embraced the whole poppy early, late 80s, early 90s vibe of just doing bright colors because you can. This show really much decided to go in that opposite direction.
Hmm.
It's very subtle
It's
visually.
very muted, yeah.
And I think a lot of the layouts and the way they've positioned the characters and the way they do the cuts from one to the other, the over the shoulders, the overall compositions of where they place the characters is really, really nice. I kind of would like to see a return to that in some of these animated sitcoms. But at this, and some of the keys and sometimes the animation and the expressions are really strong. I mean, they're really neat. Again, it's that early Simpsons where like Homer would have the heart attack and they would let them push that character model to weird extremes just to get that extremity and that emotion. But the animation itself is often really bad in this
Yeah,
one.
especially later on. It got progressively more and more worse.
Well, at least in the first season. It kind of recovered in the second season somewhat, but I think one of the big things that they definitely had trouble with was the mouth movements, and I'm not sure what to blame this on. So one thing that they kind of constantly started doing near the end of the first season is trying to recycle mouth movements to continue an extended gag or an extended monologue much longer than I think what was originally boarded out and animated. The only problem with doing that is that they aren't just recycling the mouth movement. Certain mouth shapes only appeared on certain poses, so the characters would be toggling back and forth between poses that make absolutely no sense for the context of what they're trying to say. And it becomes really obvious that they're trying to recycle and extend animation they already have, rather than sending it back or having the thing actually be animated out with poses that kind of match the performance being done by the actor.
And sometimes even when they're not doing that, they'll just simply have like the lip flap go much longer than the actual recorded dialogue. So they'll, the dialogue will cut out and then we'll have an additional 2-3 seconds of the mouth movement, which is really odd. It makes it seem like it's dubbed.
There's syncing problems with it. And they even make a joke about it when he's watching an animated thing and they kind of hang a lampshade on it, but
that's a weird thing to make a joke about, the sense like, we're cutting a lot of corners here, huh?
yeah.
It's just kind of weird thing to call attention to the fact. Like, yeah, they do call attention to the fact that their production is not the best.
And that's the weird thing, is for all the other times that it looks so nice and it's done so intelligently, those moments really stick out because there are just parts that look brilliant.
Yeah.
But in general, it's really interesting to see how that subtle kind of darkened color palette doesn't really exist in a lot of the other animation we see these days. I haven't really seen many other shows imitated at all. Like, I can't think of any that don't have a very saturated palette.
Certainly not these days.
No. And even shortly after that, too. Like, there was that kind of period in the 80s and 90s, I think also when you look at, like, Don Bluth films. Like, his stuff was not bright Technicolor Disney style. He would do these very dark, low-value, desaturated colors pretty often. And that just was kind of this odd stylistic thing for a short period of time. And then, especially I think as computer coloring became very popular, the saturation levels started just getting pushed up for a while.
Yep.
So I thought that was kind of, I think definitely visually there's some interesting things in looking back. A lot of people I know, if you're familiar with a comic artist named Kate Beaton,
mm-hmm.
A lot of people compare her drawing style to the kind of character design style you would see in the Critic.
I can see that.
I don't think she was directly influenced by it, but they're kind of like, there's a similar school of it, and they're both equally kind of expressive, and I think they're both very interesting in that regard. The critic drawing style reminds me of that. He was that famous kind of portrait caricature artist that would do these celebrity profiles, but with just one line.
Yeah, I can see that.
Hirschfeld, I can't remember his name, but I think that might be it. But that's, I think, maybe one of the things that was the foundation of it, because the celebrity caricatures are amazing. Like, you don't even have to they don't have to have the character's name mentioned, but you can recognize what they look like.
Mm-hmm.
They did a great job with that. So I think from a production design standpoint, the show was very strong. I think the execution of that production design had problems. And I don't know if it was a budget thing or if they did a lot of improvisation and a lot of last minute writing changes, because if you do that, you often have to send that footage back to Korea or wherever you're outsourcing to get it done as a retake. But if you have deadlines and you don't have that much of a budget, they'll just take frames and just recycle them where they can. So, you got anything else on the Critic?
I think one little thing I would like to touch on the fact is that there was actually some contemporary criticism that I found super interesting when doing kind of research on this.
Of Siskel and Ebert, who appear in a later their episode's amazing too.
That's actually one of the better episodes, I'd have to say, kind of quite amusingly. But
well,
they
it takes
actually,
on the topic of criticism, which is so cool.
Yeah, they actually reviewed as like kind of the only non-film that they reviewed as part of their show. They actually kind of reviewed, they're kind of the run thus far. And their criticisms, I think, are actually superbly apt and kind of things I kind of agree with in terms of, things that they have, criticized-wise. Like, there aren't as many memorable characters as The Simpsons, it did tend to not focus on the actual world of being a critic and the kind of the critical aspects of it. And they kind of just focus more on kind of like Jay as a character doing Jay stuff rather than, the kind of pitch of the show.
The premise, the show didn't really commit to the premise enough to make it feel focused.
Yeah, and one of the things they explicitly said is that the show needs to refocus itself on movies and the way critics interact with them. Kind of, double down on your theme rather than just trying to make it another character kind of, show like the character sitcom like The Simpsons. Just they kind of moved a little bit. But
to have a worldview, to kind of, again, what we were talking about earlier with having a thesis and a worldview and a perspective and an angle in which they want to do satire. Like the LAJ episode is very pointed satire, and that was very effective. And I think the Critic was kind of uniquely positioned to make fun of the media world, not just in terms of the Hollywood studios, but even when they made fun of the independent cinema, or they'd make fun of TV networks or news and the general media circus around it, because his job is to work in media and be a critiquer of it. He would be in a unique satirical position to have that match the premise of the show, as well as the struggles and the angle in which they kind of want to go about making their observations.
Yeah, and so one of the things like Siskel commented on is that Jay should be actually a very smart and apt critic. Like, regardless of his personality, he should be making critiques that are witty, intelligent, regardless of every other aspects of them, because it makes the satire all the much more stand out in the sense of, making an argument that besides all the, aspects of them that are unlikable, it gives at least something that you can actually relate about in the early pitch of it. Whereas they actually make a lot of jokes actually in the show itself, with the sense that his critiques are super simple in the standpoint of like, I could,
well, he
fart
hates
out
everything.
a show that's better.
The joke throughout the whole show, because except for Jay Sherman, who always says it stinks.
Yep.
And I think that's an apt thing. And occasionally they kind of would allude to the fact that he likes certain films and he does want them to be better. Like, there's occasions where they'll give him that insight. But yes, most of the time they make most of his criticism very simplistic, and they don't. That kind of subtracts from his power as a character. Mm-hmm. Like, he needs at least that one aspect of him to be positive, and therefore everybody ignoring him and dismissing it becomes a part of the social critique
and
that the show would be making.
It also gets him more of a, kind of a good footing as a protagonist, because it gives you something to root for, like, for all of his failings, for all the stuff wrong with him, by God, at least he's a good critic. At least he's, at least he's thinking,
observant,
like
and he's apt. Yeah. It's like that. I think that's a very good point. I think I was reading their critique of it, and I thought they were pretty spot on. I think that was in the first season. And so I think the second season is when the show started to kind of address those criticisms a little bit.
Sure.
But it was like 10 episodes and that's all they got.
Yep.
So I think the show could have lasted maybe, considering some of the deaths of some of its main voice actors, Doris Grau being one of them, I think the show could have had at least maybe 2 or 3 more good seasons in it
Hmm.
before it would kind of have gotten tired. It's just a shame that there wasn't at least a little bit more. So The Critic is one of those shows where I go, I really wish it could have gone more. I wouldn't want it to be around forever, because I think definitely looking at the way The Simpsons has become, I don't want it to go on forever. But I think this series could have at least had a couple other good seasons.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly had a lot of potential, and I don't think it, was something that
Do
didn't deserve to
do
exist.
not watch the web episodes.
Oh, yeah. I
I
have not seen those at all. Are they as bad as they sound?
They are. There's a reason I did not want to talk about them, because they are. I don't even consider them a part of it. It's really bad. I mean, they had to get rid of almost the entire cast. They're 3-minute vignettes, and it's not good. No, I don't consider them even. It's like I just don't want to consider them even a part of a canon at all. I just don't want to acknowledge how. Ugh. But that was them trying to do Flash animation back in 2000.
There's a lot of that sort of thing where people are just like, the internet will give me a chance to bring back the show from the 90s that didn't quite make it.
The internet, it will be this boundless area for new media, and it's like, it was not ready for that yet.
Remember when they made a Spaceballs webisode series?
No. Oh my god.
That was a
No.
thing. I wish that wasn't a thing.
Ugh.
But yeah, I mean, I think The Critic is interesting, and I certainly think it's worth watching. I mean, I've been pretty critical of it. But I mean, there's certain aspects that didn't hold up quite as well, but it's certainly funny and a lot of times. It can be a bit rough in others, certainly, and it's not living up to its full potential.
Well, much like anything, it has flaws.
Yeah, and one thing you were saying to me earlier is the sense that the first couple seasons excuse me, are rough, but like The Simpsons also had a first not really fantastic couple seasons, and it took a while, to get there. And I have to wonder how much of that is the process behind these sorts of sitcoms, in the sense that they have a very loose pitch, and then they just kind of storyboard it out, kind of like as it goes, so to speak, to kind of like rush out as many as possible rather than kind of iterating on the concept. Because it only had like 25, 26 episodes, but I'm obviously coming from the standpoint of being familiar with there being a lot of shows, say, out of Japan that were only planned to run 26 episodes, and that's actually a lot for a show in Japan to some degree. There's a lot of ones that are only like 13 episodes or whatnot. If that's
or like British ones where it's a whole
certainly.
series is just 6 episodes.
Yeah,
and
Mr. Bean is like 8 episodes, and people are obsessed with Mr. Bean.
Well, and that's the thing, is a lot of these, they're not written with a beginning, middle, and end in mind, because many sitcoms aren't. They're just designed in the American system just to continue as long as you can. And the reason I think a lot of these shows have to take time to find their footing is because as a pitch and as they start out, the characters are just kind of general concepts. And as you start writing episodes, you get more of a sense of who they are. They have events that start shaping their personalities and the way they start reacting to each other and things like that. So by allowing these episodes to progress over time, you start getting a better sense of who they are, not just as an audience member, but also as you're writing them.
Sure, and I mean, I don't think that... I think that if they'd spend more time kind of planning sort of thing, I mean, this might be just kind of contrary to the process of, writing sitcoms as opposed to more plot-based writing. No,
well, production schedules being as they are.
Sure, I don't know if it's necessarily realistic. Like, I think if they had more time to plan things out and kind of get a better concept of what they want to actually do with it.
Or an arc and things like that.
If they were guaranteed, like, say, would the show have been better if they'd been guaranteed 26 episodes and only 26 episodes from the outset and said, this is it, take time because you're only getting 26 episodes, make it right. Would the show have been better? Or
maybe.
Would the early episodes be better?
See, unfortunately, that's a hypothetical that I don't have an answer to.
Sure, I'm just wondering.
But I think that's a valid system. I mean, I think the reason the original Airbender series was as strong as it was is because they were able to plan it out.
Yeah, they knew how many seasons they were going to get, and they could work to that. Yeah,
they were able to schedule it. Whereas then when they had that first season of Korra, they had no idea what they were going to get, and then their order got cut in half, and so it's like, well, good luck throwing now you have to scramble and figure out and compress, and how the hell do you plan around that? How do you then do, okay, well, after you finish the season, we'll maybe let you do some more. I don't know. Like, how the hell do you plan around that?
And then just
if you want
completely
to tell a
train
story
wrecked and disjointed everything down the line because it kind of just built up at that point where they got in a certain place and then just kind of cascaded down the line and just kind of ruined their entire production, sort of planning wise.
Yeah, I mean, I heard it recovered. I haven't watched the latter seasons of it because after the first one, I just couldn't anymore.
I've
I
heard
heard it
some-
recovered, but it
I've
was...
heard some rough things about some of those middle seasons, even.
Oh yeah, no, it recovered eventually, apparently by the end, but it was rough going for at least 2 out of the 4 seasons.
That's a rough
So
place
that
to be
and that's
for
bad. But
a
that's why
plot-based thing. But of course,
but I
the Critic
think
is
you're
not
right.
plot-based.
No,
So
and that's the thing. And so I think you're right in that if they are given more support and maybe more time, but I think also the fact that having that break between seasons when you have seen how the public reacts to it, it gives you that external sense of it's really hard when you're creating something or you're drawing or you're writing to see how it is. You could be the most analytical person ever, but it's really hard to turn that on yourself because you're inside of it. So
Sure.
having that kind of break between, so like you have a season, then you have another season, there's time between it. Like especially with these episodes where they're animated, so you have like quite a few months of a break between it, and you could kind of look back at it and see what you've created and where you can kind of do tweaks and fixes. If they had, okay, you're only ever going to get 26 episodes, well, they're never going to get that time to pause and look back and then move on to continuing the next. So it's both good and bad. I think for maybe a more tightly plotted show, that makes sense. But for a sitcom, especially because these types of shows live and die about whether or not they can be funny that given episode. It's not as important to have kind of a plot thread or development. I think it helps. I'm of the school that I think comedy should have an equal balance of humor and some kind of character because it gives you some kind of grounding upon which to be interested in what you're watching. I think shows like Parks and Recreation did a really good job of that. But it's hard just because the purpose of a sitcom versus a drama or an adventure series are kind of opposed, if that makes any sense.
right.
So I think you just have to think about what type of production methodology fits your intent better. And I think shows like sitcoms and ones that are more about comedy than necessarily narrative, they need time to kind of figure out what their voice is and how they want to go about it.
And a lot of even though the Critic has a lot of animated gags that would only work in animation, a lot of the general sitcom writing in it feels very sitcom-y. The Simpsons is
Or it
itself an animated.
feels like very Woody Allen, like it would be something you would have seen in one of his older films.
Yeah, I'm just saying in the sense like if you look at The Simpsons, its animated sitcom gags don't feel like they were necessarily the same sort of sitcom gags you necessarily get out of a non-Simpsons type sitcom. Whereas The Critic, some of the gags kind of felt overly 90s, kind of live action sort of sitcom. I'm not saying
A
overall.
little bit. I think the
I mean,
fact
it
that
might
it
be
was
just me just
animated
trying to
allowed
project-
it to do some of these very extended fantasies that you would never
Absolutely.
ever be able to do.
Sure. And I'm not saying entirety. I'm just I don't know, to some degree I think I just 90 sitcoms or so just absolutely nothing I have any interest in these days. In the
Yeah.
sense that kind of just general structure just kind of does nothing for me.
Well,
And
it
I mean,
feels
that's valid.
artificial.
Sure, and it just feels really contrived.
Yeah, I could see that.
I mean, there's a lot of really fantastic gags in The Critic, and that's, I would certainly recommend it to people, regardless of all, my whining and minging I've been doing. But I was just, it's got some issues, and that's, that is what
That's
it is.
they're worth noting. It's a product of it. It's heavily a product of its time.
Certainly.
So I mean that's definitely something you have to understand. So it's very 90s. It is so 90s.
It both to its benefit and to its detriment.
Yeah. So that's it for The Critic. And so next week we are going to be talking about Steven Universe. Both of us I have to kind of rewatch it, and you have to finish watching it for the first time.
I'm like 28 episodes in, so I think I can make it. I've got
Yeah, you're
a few
almost
days
halfway.
before we go through it, but I think I can make it.
I'll find some time for that. And oh, right. Make sure to email us when you guys have suggestions or thoughts about the previous episode. If you guys have ones you want to add to the list, I've been getting a whole bunch of really interesting ones that I haven't heard about before, so I'm really excited to check those out. The email is ADthepodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to send those in. And you can always catch us on Twitter. My handle is @RYMagnuson.
And I'm at SA Zorak. And if you have any thoughts also about upcoming episodes that we've already announced, certainly let us know if you have any thoughts about, say, Steven Universe, since it's a relatively hot topic, sort of series at the moment. If you have any thoughts about it, certainly we're willing to read it out and kind of share along, or, at least
guide our discussion and
or steal ideas from you. We might do that too. I've got no shame.
Well, I'm definitely going to give credit for those. So
maybe you will.
And I think that's it.
Yeah, well, I think that's about it. Yeah.
All right. See you next week.
All hail Duke. Duke is life. All hail Duke. Duke is life. All Pigeons seem to like the sound of my...